The words "you're fired" still hung in the air, tasting more bitter than the most over-extracted espresso. And from Leo, my adopted brother no less, barely an hour after our parents' lawyer had confirmed his new title, president of the Daily Grind, the coffee business our family had built, bean by painstaking bean. He delivered the news in the small, cluttered office above the main shop, the same office where our father had taught me to cup my first coffee, where our mother had meticulously balanced the books, her quiet humming a counterpoint to the distant hiss of the steam wand. Leo sat in Dad's old leather chair, a chair he seemed to swim in rather than occupy, a slick, overly confident smile plastered on his face. "We're going in a new direction, Alex," he'd said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed, modernizing, streamlining. "And, frankly, your skill set, while admirable for its time, doesn't quite fit the dynamic, forward-thinking paradigm I envision." Paradigm. He'd always loved buzzwords, Leo had. Ever since he'd joined our family at 10, a quiet, watchful boy who'd slowly blossomed under Mom and Dad's unwavering affection, he'd sought ways to distinguish himself, to prove his worth in ways that felt alien to the simple, craft-focused life I knew. I was 5 years his senior, already deeply enmeshed in the world of coffee, the rich aromas of roasting beans practically woven into my DNA. Dad had started the Daily Grind as a tiny stall fueled by a passion for sourcing the perfect green beans and roasting them to reveal their soul. I'd been by his side, learning, absorbing, experimenting. Mom brought the business acumen, turning Dad's passion into a sustainable livelihood, then a thriving local institution. We didn't just serve coffee. We curated experiences. We knew our regulars by name, their orders, their stories. Leo, when he was old enough, was offered the same immersion. He'd shown interest, but his gaze always seemed to drift towards the spreadsheets, the profit margins, the potential for expansion, rather than the subtle art of the perfect creamer or the nuanced notes of a single origin pour-over. I developed our signature blend, the Morning Star blend, nearly a decade ago. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a symphony of carefully selected beans from 3 different continents, each roasted to a precise individual profile before being post-blended. One component even underwent a brief proprietary aging process I'd stumbled upon through countless experiments, a secret that coaxed out an unexpected sweetness, a lingering note of dark chocolate and spice that had customers lining up down the block. The Morning Star had won awards, garnered accolades in coffee connoisseur magazines, and, most importantly, it had become the bedrock of the Daily Grind's reputation, its liquid soul. Dad had been so proud, Mom too. They saw it as the culmination of our family's dedication. "That's your magic, Alex," Dad would say, clapping me on the back. "Pure magic." The signs of Leo's ambition, in retrospect, were all there, like faint cracks in a favorite mug, ignored until it shatters. As Mom and Dad's health began to wane, as they stepped back, handing more operational control to both of us, Leo's focus sharpened. He spoke of franchising before we'd even perfected our second location's consistency. He talked of cutting costs on premium, sentimental beans and exploring more commercially viable alternatives. He'd make subtle comments about my artisan approach being a bottleneck, my dedication to training baristas properly inefficient. I'd tried to explain that the quality, the craft was our business model, but he'd just nod, that same slick smile appearing. His eyes distant. He was charming, though, I'd give him that. He'd charmed the lawyers, charmed the accountants, and clearly had presented a vision of growth to Mom and Dad in their declining years that, clouded by illness and a desire for their adopted son to find his place, they had ultimately endorsed by naming him president in their final directives for the company. His elevation to president hadn't surprised me entirely. The swiftness and brutality of my dismissal, however, that had been a cold shock. "It's just business, Alex," he'd added, almost as an afterthought, shuffling some papers on the desk, refusing to meet my eyes. "Nothing personal, nothing personal." He was discarding 20 years of my life, my passion, my very identity, and it was nothing personal. The quiet hum of the shop below, a sound that had been the backdrop to my entire adult life, suddenly felt miles away, a fading echo. I nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over the initial tremor of disbelief. He mistook it for acceptance, I think. His smile widened. The first few days were a blur of forced readjustment. The automatic urge to rise before dawn, to head to the shop, to calibrate the grinders, to inhale that first rich scent of the Morning Star blend being brewed, these were reflexes I had to consciously unlearn. The injustice of it all settled in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. It wasn't just the job or even the coffee, though that loss was profound. It was the betrayal, the callous dismissal by someone I had, despite our differences, considered family. Leo's words, "Nothing personal," echoed. He who had been welcomed, nurtured, given every advantage, now wielding his newfound power with such casual cruelty. My mind, usually occupied with roast profiles and extraction times, began to turn in a different direction. Reflection gave way to a quiet, methodical assessment of the situation. I knew the business inside and out, not just the craft, but its vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities Leo, in his arrogant pursuit of a new paradigm, would undoubtedly overlook. I remembered the early days of the Morning Star blend. Dad had been so excited. He'd wanted to protect it, but we were small then, and formal legalities seemed an unnecessary expense. "It's your blend, Alex," he'd said. "Your intellectual property, really." On a whim, more as a personal project and a nod to his words, I'd looked into it. I had, years ago, with my own savings, registered the name Morning Star Blend as a personal trademark. It was a small, almost forgotten piece of paper, filed away with old roasting journals and experimental blend notes. The company, the Daily Grind Inc., owned the shops, the equipment, employed the staff, but the name of its most famous, most profitable product? That, I recalled with a slow dawning clarity, belonged to me, and the precise, detailed recipe, with its nuanced roasting curves for each of the 5 bean components, and the exact methodology for the aging process of the Sumatran Gayo, that existed only in my encrypted personal files and in a meticulously handwritten journal stored safely at my apartment. The official recipe in the company's files was a simplified version, lacking the critical subtleties that made the blend truly exceptional, something Dad and I had kept close as a form of quality control. A sense of quiet determination began to displace the hurt. This wasn't about mere revenge, I told myself. It was about rectifying a wrong, about the true valuation of skill and dedication. Leo had dismissed my contribution as outdated. He would soon learn the precise current market value of what he had so carelessly discarded. I began to watch from a distance. Old habits die hard. I still found myself walking past the Daily Grind on my morning constitutional. I'd see new staff rushed and stressed through the window. I heard whispers from former colleagues, loyal souls who'd call, voices hushed, updating me. Sarah, my old head barista whom I'd mentored for years, told me they were struggling with the Morning Star. "It's just not the same, Alex," she'd lamented. "Leo keeps pushing for volume, but the customers are noticing. The reviews online are slipping." He'd apparently tried to find my detailed notes, flying into a brief rage when all he found was the basic outline. He'd even tried to get Sarah to remember the finer points, but she, bless her loyalty, played dumb, claiming the complexity was always my domain. I listened, and a plan, cold and clear as a perfectly brewed iced coffee, began to crystallize. Leo had sowed the wind with his arrogance. He was about to reap the whirlwind of consequence. The first step was a simple, registered letter to my lawyer. The subsequent weeks unfolded with a predictable, almost pitiable pattern from Leo's end, relayed to me by concerned former staff, and even a few long-time customers who'd sought me out. The quality of the Morning Star blend, the shop's flagship, nosedived. Without the exact roasting specifications, the carefully guarded aging process for the crucial Indonesian component, and the precise ratios for the post-roast blending, it became a shadow of its former self. Harsh where it was once smooth, muddy where it had been complex. Online forums, once filled with praise for the Daily Grind, now hosted threads like, "What happened to the Morning Star?" and "New owners? Coffee's gone downhill." Leo, I heard, was frantic. He'd brought in consultants, other roasters who tried to reverse engineer the blend from the remaining stock of green beans I had sourced. They failed, of course. The magic wasn't just in the ingredients, but in the alchemical process I'd perfected over years. His dynamic, forward-thinking paradigm apparently hadn't accounted for the irreplaceability of genuine expertise. He tried to introduce new blends, flashy names with mediocre contents, pushing them with aggressive marketing. They flopped. The loyal customer base, built over decades on the promise of consistent excellence, particularly the excellence of the Morning Star, felt betrayed. Foot traffic dwindled. Sarah told me Leo had been seen shouting at staff, his slick composure cracking under the strain. He'd apparently even tried to call Mum and Dad's old suppliers, attempting to glean some insight into my methods, only to be met with polite, professional stonewalling. My relationships in the industry were built on years of mutual respect, something Leo couldn't manufacture overnight. His attempts to cut costs elsewhere, cheaper milk, less experienced staff working longer hours, only exacerbated the decline. The vibrant, welcoming atmosphere of the daily grind, carefully cultivated by my parents and myself, was souring. Then, as the third-quarter sales reports undoubtedly landed on his desk like a lead weight, my lawyer's letter arrived at the main office of The Daily Grind, Inc. It was a simple, legally precise document, a cease and desist notification for the unauthorized use of the trademarked name Morning Star Blend, which was, it clearly stated, my exclusive intellectual property. It outlined the evidence of its registration in my name, predating its widespread commercial use by the company when it was just a specialty item by Alex. It demanded an immediate halt to all sales and marketing under that name, and hinted at further legal action for damages if non-compliance continued. I had instructed my lawyer to be firm but to leave a small, almost invisible door open for negotiation on my terms. Leo's call came within the hour. His voice, usually so smooth and assured, was raw, laced with a panic he couldn't conceal. "Alex, what in God's name is this? Are you trying to destroy the company? Our parents' legacy?" The use of "our parents" was a calculated barb I knew, meant to guilt me. It didn't work. I let him vent, his accusations of sabotage, of betrayal. The irony was almost too rich, washing over me. He sounded like a cornered animal. The confident president was gone, replaced by a desperate, floundering man. When he finally paused for breath, his voice cracking, I spoke, my tone calm, measured, every word deliberately chosen. "Leo." I began, the sound of his name feeling foreign without the usual familial warmth. "Do you recall our last conversation in Dad's office? You said my skills were outdated. You spoke of streamlining. You said it was just business, nothing personal. I let that hang in the air for a moment." "Well, this," I continued, indicating the legal predicament he was now facing, "this is also just business. The Morning Star Blend, the name, its reputation is mine. I created it. I protected it. You dismissed its creator, its steward. And now you're facing the consequences of that business decision." He started to stammer, a jumble of threats, pleas, and accusations of pettiness. He freaked out, precisely as I had anticipated. The shouting became almost incoherent, a torrent of fear and fury. He couldn't comprehend that the part of the business he'd deemed expendable was, in fact, its very heart. The fallout for Leo was swift and brutal. Forced to immediately pull the Morning Star Blend, sales plummeted catastrophically. His hastily rebranded Leo's Prime Brew was met with derision. The Daily Grind, once a name synonymous with quality, became a local punchline. Suppliers, already wary of his erratic management, began demanding upfront payments. The bank, which had financed his modernization plans based on historical sales figures, heavily reliant on the Morning Star, started asking pointed questions. His authority, built on a flimsy foundation of buzzwords and arrogance, crumbled. Employees, already demoralized, started leaving in droves, Sarah among them, citing a toxic work environment and a captain steering the ship directly at an iceberg. The family, what was left of its cohesive structure since Mom and Dad passed, became involved. A distant aunt who held a small, forgotten share in the original company charter, horrified by the rapid decline and the stain on the family name, called an emergency meeting with the company's lawyer and a very chastened Leo. The negotiation, when it came, was entirely on my terms. Leo was conspicuously absent, his presence deemed counterproductive by the family lawyer. Instead, Aunt Carol, a pragmatic woman I'd always liked, sat across the table. There were no accusations, just a grim acknowledgement of the disaster. They wanted the Morning Star blend back, whatever it took. I didn't want to return to the company under Leo's shadow, nor did I particularly want to be bought out of just the recipe and trademark, only to see him potentially mismanage it again, albeit legally this time. My vision had sharpened beyond mere vindication. I proposed something different. I would establish my own independent micro-roastery and cafe, focusing on specialty blends and single-origin coffees. The Morning Star blend would be its centerpiece exclusively. To The Daily Grind, now a wounded entity, I offered a stark choice: wither completely or enter into a limited, highly controlled licensing agreement to sell my pre-packaged, roasted Morning Star blend beans, not the brewed coffee, just the beans, at a significant markup with stringent quality control provisos for a fixed, short term. This would give them a temporary lifeline, a chance to perhaps rebuild with something genuinely new if Leo was capable, but the heart of the operation, the magic, would be undeniably mine. Aunt Carol, after a pained sigh, agreed. The terms were harsh, but they were desperate. Leo, I heard later, had to be practically restrained when he heard the conditions. He lost the presidency within months, Aunt Carol stepping in as interim CEO to salvage what remained. The original Daily Grind limped on, a shadow of its former self, selling my beans like a franchisee, a constant, galling reminder of his failure. My new venture, Phoenix Roasters, opened 6 months later in a small, sunlit space a few blocks away. The name felt appropriate. With Sarah as my head barista and manager, and a small team of passionate coffee lovers, we thrived. The old regulars flocked to us, drawn by the authentic Morning Star blend and the return of the welcoming, craft-focused atmosphere they'd missed. We were smaller, more focused, but profitable, and, more importantly, joyful. Looking back, there's a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored. It wasn't about the money, though Phoenix Roasters provides a comfortable life. It was about respect, about the undeniable value of skill, passion, and dedication. Leo had seen these as liabilities, old-fashioned notions in his grand, impersonal paradigm. He learned, the hard way, that some things cannot be streamlined or outsourced. True worth isn't found in a title or a balance sheet, but in the meticulous care poured into one's craft, in the connections forged over shared experiences, like a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. The Morning Star blend still tastes like magic, but now it also tastes like justice. And that, I've found, is a flavor all its own.